The world likes to imagine power as something loud. Aircraft carriers, sanctions, flags planted on distant soil. But sometimes power is quieter. Sometimes it sits under ice. Just days after a dramatic US operation in Venezuela, President Trump looked north and said something that startled allies and rivals alike. We need Greenland from the standpoint of national security. Not for conquest, not for symbolism, but for what lies beneath a frozen island most people never think about. Because in a warming world, ice is retreating. And what emerges are minerals that decide who builds the future. Rare earths that power missiles, satellites, electric vehicles, and modern warfare itself. This is not a story about buying territory. It is a story about supply chains becoming battlefields, about climate change rewriting maps, and about Greenland quietly moving from the margins of geopolitics to its center. If you want to understand how global power is being reshaped slowly, silently, stay with me. Because to grasp why Greenland matters, we first need to understand the problem Washington is trying to solve. The problem Washington is facing is not abstract. It is painfully concrete. Modern economies run on materials most people have never heard of. Neodymium, dysprosium, terbium. These rare earth elements sit inside fighter jets, missile guidance systems, satellites, wind turbines, and electric vehicles. Without them, advanced technology simply stops. And here is the vulnerability. For decades, the United States allowed its rare earth supply chains to drift overseas. Today, China dominates not just mining, but the far more critical stages of separation and processing. When Beijing imposed export controls on heavy rare earths, the shock rippled through Western industries. Automotive factories slowed. Defense planners grew uneasy. Supply chains that looked efficient on paper suddenly felt fragile in reality. President Trump's renewed focus on Greenland flows directly from this pressure point. It reflects a broader shift in US thinking. Resource security is no longer economic policy. It is national security. And Greenland, with its vast untapped reserves and strategic Arctic position, sits uncomfortably close to the heart of that dilemma. To see how this situation came into being, we need to step back into history, geography, and a changing Arctic that few were paying attention to until it began to melt. Greenland did not suddenly become important. It was always there. What changed was the world around it. During World War II, the United States established air and naval bases on Greenland, not for minerals, but for survival. The island became a forward shield against threats moving across the North Atlantic. When the Cold War followed, Greenland remained a quiet sentinel, watching the skies for Soviet missiles from what is now the Pituffik space base. Then the Arctic froze itself back into obscurity. Ice-sealed routes, distance discouraged ambition, and global supply chains chased cheaper production elsewhere. But climate change has disrupted that equilibrium. Melting ice caps are opening access to land that was once unreachable. Shipping routes that existed only in theory are becoming seasonal realities. The Northwest Passage, potentially thousands of kilometers shorter than traditional routes, is no longer a mapmaker's fantasy. At the same time, technology accelerated. The world's dependence on rare earths deepened. And suddenly, Greenland's geology intersected with global demand at a historic moment. What was once a frozen buffer is now a strategic crossroads. And that transformation set the stage for the first real crisis to emerge. The first crisis did not arrive with troops or treaties. It arrived through trade. In 2025, China tightened export controls on heavy rare earth elements. Not completely, not dramatically, just enough to remind the world who controlled the choke points. Almost immediately, the effects spread outward. Automotive supply chains stalled, production lines slowed, then paused. Industries that had optimized for efficiency discovered they had optimized away resilience. In Washington, The message was unmistakable. Dependency had become exposure. That is when Greenland moved from theory to urgency, because buried beneath its southern ice are deposits that rank among the largest in the world. Kvanefjeld, Tanbreez, names that rarely appear in headlines but now sit quietly inside national security briefings. The United States responded with a mix of diplomacy and capital, public-private partnerships, bilateral mineral agreements, and for the first time, serious consideration of overseas mining investment as a strategic tool. This was not about short-term profit. It was about leverage. And once supply chains became instruments of pressure, the real mechanism behind the struggle began to reveal itself. What sits beneath Greenland is valuable, but what truly matters is who controls the system around it. Rare earths are not like oil. Mining them is only the first step. The real power lies in separation, processing, and refinement stages that are expensive, technically complex, and environmentally sensitive. This is where China holds its advantage. Even if Greenland began mining tomorrow, the ore would still need to be processed, and today China dominates that capability globally. That creates a paradox for the United States. Access to resources does not automatically translate into security. Without aligned processing and offtake, new mines can still reinforce old dependencies. Greenland sits inside this tension. It wants development, it wants investment, but it also wants sovereignty, environmental protection, and political stability. Western capital moves cautiously, Chinese capital moves quickly, and when infrastructure is missing, ports, roads, power, speed often wins. This is why Greenland's leaders have issued quiet warnings. Without sufficient Western engagement, other partners will step in. Not out of ideology, out of necessity. The struggle over Greenland, then, is not about ownership. It is about systems, about whether democratic states can build supply chains that match their values without surrendering strategic ground. And that unresolved tension soon triggered a second, more visible crisis. The second crisis unfolded not in markets, but in politics. And it hit closer to home. In Greenland, rare earths collided with something far harder to extract than minerals: consent. At Kvanefjeld, rare earths sit alongside uranium. That single fact changed everything. In 2021, voters turned a technical mining debate into a national reckoning. The election became known simply as the mining election. A grassroots movement, farmers, fishermen, indigenous residents drew a clear line. Uranium mining was unacceptable. The new government acted quickly. It banned mining projects with uranium concentrations above strict thresholds. Kvanefjeld was effectively frozen overnight. What followed was legal and political shock. The project's developers sued for compensation worth nearly 4 times Greenland's GDP. Investors recalculated risk. Foreign partners hesitated. A deposit, once framed as a strategic asset, became a symbol of instability. Meanwhile, Tanbreez moved forward quietly. Lower uranium exposure, early community engagement, an exploitation license few projects ever receive. The lesson was stark. Geology does not guarantee viability. Social license determines survival. And as Washington watched these internal battles unfold, a deeper question emerged, one that moves from minerals to people and from strategy to everyday life. For people living in southern Greenland, these debates are not abstract. They are personal. If you live near Narsak, mining is not a policy paper. It is the land you hunt on, the water you fish in, the air your children breathe. Promises of jobs compete with fears of contamination. Economic opportunity clashes with memories of decisions made far away by outsiders with little understanding of local life. That tension explains why resistance formed so quickly and why it was so powerful. At the same time, the absence of development has its own cost. Young people leave, communities shrink, economic dependence deepens. This is the quiet dilemma Greenland faces. Say no to mining and risk stagnation. Say yes without trust and risk social fracture. For the United States and its allies, this is where strategy becomes moral. If partnerships fail to deliver visible benefits, early training, infrastructure, local ownership support evaporates. If you want to understand geopolitics today, look beyond capitals and contracts. Look at how global decisions land in ordinary lives, because the future of Greenland will ultimately be decided not in Washington or Beijing, but by whether its people believe development serves them. And that belief, or lack of it, carries consequences far beyond the island itself. What happens in Greenland does not stay in Greenland, because the Arctic is no longer a frozen margin of the world. It is becoming a corridor. As ice retreats, new shipping routes begin to matter. The Northwest Passage promises a future where goods move between East Asia and Europe thousands of kilometers faster. Whoever helps secure, supply, and stabilize this route gains economic and strategic advantage. Greenland sits directly along that emerging axis. Its ports, airspace, and territory shape how power moves through the Arctic. That is why the United States maintains its northernmost military installation there, and why China, despite repeated setbacks, continues to show interest. Beijing's Arctic ambitions have been constrained but not abandoned. China may struggle to build airports or bases, yet it already dominates rare earth processing worldwide. That leverage matters. It means influence can arrive through contracts rather than concrete. Europe, too, has entered the equation. The European Union is aligning critical minerals policy with security strategy. Projects in Greenland now link directly to Europe's industrial future. This convergence is the point. Greenland is becoming a node where climate change, supply chains, and security intersect. A failure to engage responsibly does not create neutrality. It creates a vacuum. And in geopolitics, vacuums rarely remain empty for long. The future of Greenland does not move in a straight line. It branches. One path is cooperative and deliberate. The United States works with Europe. Capital arrives alongside infrastructure, processing capacity, and clear standards. Mining develops slowly but credibly. Greenland gains revenue, jobs, and leverage without surrendering control. In this scenario, Greenland becomes a trusted Arctic partner, not just a resource supplier. A second path is muddled. Western engagement remains hesitant. Projects stall under regulatory uncertainty. Infrastructure gaps persist. Investment trickles in, but never enough to transform the economy. Greenland stays strategically important, yet economically constrained, caught between ambition and hesitation. The third path is the most dangerous. If Western capital continues to delay, others will not. Chinese firms, already embedded through processing expertise and minority stakes, expand their role, not through force, through financing, offtake agreements, and infrastructure tied to long-term dependence. Greenland gains development, but at the cost of strategic autonomy. And the Arctic tilts quietly, irreversibly. These futures are not predetermined. They are shaped by choices being made now about speed, trust, and coordination. And that brings us to the final question. What kind of power does the United States want to project in a world where influence is built less by dominance and more by design? Greenland will never be won with a flag, or with a headline, or with a declaration of ownership. It will be shaped by something far less dramatic. By patience, by infrastructure, by whether partnerships are built to last. The lesson here is not that Greenland must choose the United States. It is that the United States must choose how it shows up, through coordinated investment, not coercion, through credibility, not urgency-driven shortcuts, through respect for communities, not just contracts. Tanbreez and projects like it are not shortcuts to dominance. They are tests of whether democratic systems can secure critical resources without undermining the values they claim to defend, of whether power in the 21st century can be exercised quietly, responsibly, and with foresight. In a warming world, the map is changing faster than our habits. Ice is melting, supply chains are hardening into fault lines, and places once ignored are becoming decisive. If you want to understand where global competition is really headed, do not look only at battlefields or borders. Look at islands like Greenland and ask a harder question, not who owns the future, but who is capable of building it together. If this analysis helped you see the Arctic differently, stay with me, because the next chapter of global power is already unfolding.